A woman asked why a rich man helped her in Alaska. He changed the subject. He had already decided not to stop. That was the problem. Daniel Frost had made the decision before the road curved, before he saw the woman standing still, before the question formed and waited for him a few seconds ahead of time. There was a rule he followed now. Simple. Quiet. Do not interrupt your own routine. Once broken, routines had a way of asking for more. He kept driving for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Then the truck slowed anyway. Daniel did not look at the woman first. He looked at the dashboard clock. 6:47 a.m., too early for help calls. Too late for mistakes. The engine idled, steady. His hands stayed on the wheel longer than they needed to. Outside, a woman stood near the shoulder of the road. Not waving, not pacing, just standing with her arms pulled close to her body as if the cold had already claimed its space. Her car was angled wrong, nose slightly off the packed snow, hazard lights blinking at an uneven rhythm. One blink held longer than the other. That detail mattered more than it should have. Daniel pulled over. He stepped out without urgency. No rush, no apology to the morning. The cold cut clean through wool and denim, sharp enough to make every movement deliberate. Alaska did not reward hesitation, but it punished carelessness even faster. The woman turned when she heard the door close. Her face registered relief only briefly. Like a reflex, she corrected out of habit. She did not step toward him. "Morning," she said. One word. Functional. Daniel nodded. "Morning." He crouched by the front tire without asking permission. The rubber was stiff with cold, the tread packed with snow that had turned to ice. He tapped it once with his knuckles. Solid enough to hold. Not the tire, then. He stood, glanced beneath the hood. A hose had slipped loose. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of problem that waited quietly until someone noticed. He fixed it in under a minute. The woman watched, hands tucked into her sleeves. She did not comment, did not offer help that would only slow him down. When he closed the hood, the silence stayed intact. "Try it now," Daniel said. The engine turned over on the first attempt. She exhaled, slow, controlled. "Thank you." Daniel stepped back. He pulled a pair of dry gloves from his coat pocket and held them out. He did not explain why he had them, or why they were clean, or how long they had been there. She hesitated, then took them. Her fingers disappeared into the lining, as if the gloves had been waiting for her specifically. There was a pause after that, the kind that invites a question. She looked at him, then at the truck, then back again. "Why did you stop?" The question was not suspicious. It was calm, curious in the way people become when something disrupts their expectations without announcing itself. Daniel did not answer it. Instead, he glanced down the road, where the trees thinned and the sky opened wider, pale and heavy with incoming snow. Timing mattered here. He said, "Storm will move in before noon." She followed his gaze. "It always does." He nodded. Agreement, not explanation. She waited another beat. Then, softer still. "Most people do not stop." Daniel shifted his weight, already stepping back toward the truck. "Road is better after the bend," he said. "Less drift." It was not an answer. It was a direction. She did not press. When he drove away, the road curved exactly where he said it would. In the rearview mirror, he saw her pull out carefully, hazards off now, her timing corrected. The gloves were still on her hands. Snow began to fall before he reached the next mile marker. Not heavy yet, just enough to change the sound of the tires against the road, just enough to mark the morning as something that would not repeat itself. Daniel adjusted his route without thinking. Left instead of right. A longer way home. Behind him, a woman named Lena Harper stood alone for a moment longer than necessary before getting in her car, looking down at the gloves as if they were an object she would later have to explain, not to anyone else, but to herself. Neither of them knew yet that the question had not been answered, only delayed. And in Alaska, timing was never neutral. By the time Daniel Frost reached the cabin, the snow had learned his schedule. It waited until the truck was parked, until the engine clicked itself quiet, until the door shut with the same control pressure he always used. Only then did the wind pick up, nudging loose flakes across the clearing as if testing whether the place was still occupied. The cabin did not answer. It never did. Inside, warmth held its ground. Not dramatic heat, not the kind that fogged the windows or announced comfort. Just enough to soften the air, to slow the cold that clung to his coat as he hung it on the same hook, third from the door. The gloves were missing from the pocket. He noticed the absence without stopping, the way you notice a missing step in a staircase you have walked 100 times. He washed his hands at the sink, water running until it reached a steady temperature. Not hot, not cold, somewhere between. He dried them with a towel folded square, replaced it the same way. The kettle went on next. No ruse. It would whistle when it was ready. Outside, the forest held its distance. Spruce and birch stood dark against the snow, spaced far enough apart that nothing felt crowded. The road beyond the trees was invisible from here. That was intentional. Daniel moved through the cabin in a slow circuit, checking what did not need checking. The window latch, the stove damper, the single lamp near the table. When he turned it on, the yellow light spread outward, stopping exactly where the wood walls asked it to. It had not reached the corners all at once. A dog lifted its head near the hearth. Thick fur, pale eyes, the quiet patience of something bred for weather that did not apologize. The husky stretched, stood, and crossed the room with measured steps, nails clicking once on the floor before stopping at Daniel's knee. He rested a hand there. One pass only. Enough. The kettle whistled. He poured water over ground coffee, watched the surface darken, bloom settle. Steam rose and disappeared before it could make a point of itself. He carried the mug to the table and sat, not facing the window, not turning his back to it either. This was the part that did not change. Morning meant the same chair. Evening meant the same light. Food was simple. Bread toasted once, never twice. Soup reheated slowly. Plates washed immediately, stacked to dry without clatter. Nothing waited overnight unless it was supposed to. Outside, the wind tested the walls again. The cabin held. Later, Daniel stepped back into the cold with a pair of skis over his shoulder. Not for speed, not for distance. The trail began behind the cabin, narrow and unmarked, pressed into the snow by repetition rather than intention. He moved along it without music, without counting time, breath finding its own pattern. The forest opened and closed around him. Trees leaned, then straightened. Shadows shifted. Somewhere deeper in, an animal moved and stopped. Nothing announced itself. He skied until the trail ended where it always did, at a stand of trees bent low with snow. He paused there, listening, then turned back without looking for something more. By the time he returned, dusk had already decided to stay. The lamp was still on when he entered. The dog had not moved far. Daniel set the skis in their place, brushed snow from his boots, and added one log to the fire. Not two. One was enough to carry the night. Outside, the temperature dropped. Inside, the cabin adjusted. Miles away, Lena Harper locked the door of the lodge as the last light faded from the sky. The day had passed without incident. Guests had come and gone. Coffee had been poured. Floors swept. The kind of work that leaves no record once it is finished. She removed her gloves and set them on the counter. They were not hers. She knew that. She also knew she would not forget where they came from. Objects carried timing in places like this. They arrived when they were needed and stayed longer than expected. The wind picked up again, pressing snow against the windows. The lodge lights glowed warm against the dark, a small answer to a large night. Back at the cabin, Daniel sat with his coffee cooling beside him, the fire settling into itself, the dog asleep but alert enough to open one eye if the quiet changed. It did not. This was Alaska as it presented itself when nothing was being asked of it. Cold outside, warm within reach. A world reduced to what could be repeated without harm. For now, the routine held. Daniel Frost woke before the light reached the treeline. Not because of an alarm. There was none. The room carried just enough cold to make staying in bed a choice rather than a default. He sat up, waited until the cabin settled around him, then stood. The day began the same way it always did. He ground the coffee by hand, slow turns, listening for the moment the resistance changed. The sound was low, contained, something you could miss if you were not paying attention. He heated water in a small kettle, watched the steam rise without rushing it. The mug was thick ceramic, unmarked, warm before it was filled. Breakfast was simple. Toast cut clean. Butter spread edge to edge. 2 eggs, cooked without color, placed carefully on the plate. Nothing crowded the space. The table held only what was needed. The rest waited its turn. He ate standing near the window, not for the view, but for the light. Outside, the snow had settled overnight into a smooth, uninterrupted layer. No tracks, no signs of urgency. Afterward, he washed the plate immediately. The sink was left dry. The towel returned to its fold. The husky was already waiting by the door. Harness, straps checked once, then again. The sled was light today, loaded with supplies bound for town. Flour, dry goods, a crate of apples wrapped in canvas. Practical weight. The dogs leaned into the harness without command, their energy controlled, ready. Daniel stepped onto the runners and let them take the first pull. The road into town was not wide, but it was known. Snowbanks rose on either side, shaped by weeks of plowing and wind. He passed the same bend where he had slowed 2 mornings earlier, the place where the road curved just enough to hide what waited beyond it. There was nothing there now, only drifted snow and a line of dark trees. In town, he unhitched the sled behind a small supply store. No one owned cement. No one hurried to greet him. That was how he preferred it. Inside, the air smelled of wood and paper and something faintly sweet. He set the crate on the counter. The owner nodded once, slid a receipt across without asking for a name. "Cold coming back tonight," the man said. Daniel nodded. "It usually does." He paid in cash. Exact change. Outside, a truck struggled to start. An older model, hood up, a man bent over the engine with gloves already darkened by grease. Daniel waited a moment, watching without staring, then stepped closer. The issue was simple, a loose connection. He tightened it, stepped back. The engine caught. The man said, "Thank you." Daniel said nothing, already moving away. He walked down the main street after that, stopping where he always did. The hardware store, the small cafe on the corner. He did not linger. A thermos was filled, a loaf of bread wrapped in paper. The routine stayed intact because it was not asked to perform. By mid-morning, he was back on the trail leading away from town, the dogs settling into a steady pace. The sled moved smoothly behind them, runners whispering against packed snow. The forest closed in again, familiar and unbothered. Daniel stepped off the sled near a clearing and switched to skis, the dogs resting without instruction. He moved through the trees at an even rhythm, breath visible, body warm beneath layers chosen for function rather than display. He skied until the trail looped back on itself, then stopped. He did not push farther. He never did. On the return, he passed the lodge without stopping. Light spilled from the windows, warm and contained. For a moment, he slowed. Not enough to be noticed. Enough to register the place and continue. Inside the lodge, Lena Harper was finishing her shift. She wiped the counter, set the chairs in their order, turned the sign from open to closed. The gloves lay folded beside the register. She had not taken them home. Not yet. Outside, the sled moved past without sound beyond the soft rhythm of paws and runners. Lena did not see him. Daniel did not look toward the windows. Back at the cabin, the routine completed itself. Supplies stored. Harnesses hung to dry. One log added to the fire. Coffee reheated, then left untouched for a few minutes before he drank it. The day had been full without being crowded. In Alaska, that was enough. She entered his world without crossing a boundary. Not by asking questions. Not by arriving early. Not by taking space that had not been offered. Lena Harper appeared the way some people do in Alaska, already part of the landscape by the time you noticed them. It happened at the lodge, late afternoon, when the light dropped low enough to turn the snow blue. Daniel stepped inside to warm his hands. No urgency, no expectation. The door closed behind him with a muted thud, sealing out the wind. "Coffee is still hot," she said from behind the counter. Not as an offer, as information. Daniel nodded once and moved toward the side table where mugs waited in their usual places. No menu. No greeting ritual. The lodge did not require either. Lena continued wiping the counter, slow circles, cloth folded neatly over her fingers. She did not watch him. That was the first detail that mattered. People usually watched. They glanced at his coat, his boots, the way he moved without excess. They tried to place him. Lena did not. She finished what she was doing, rinsed the cloth, hung it to dry. When she turned back, she slid a mug toward him, stopping it an inch from the edge. Enough room to adjust if needed. She did not ask how he took it. Daniel wrapped his hands around the ceramic. The heat held steady. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows. Snow tapped lightly, then stopped. The lodge stayed warm, contained, lit by soft bulbs that did not glare. Lena moved to the other end of the counter and began sorting mail. Local flyers. A handwritten envelope. A receipt folded twice. She read without rushing, set each item in its place. The silence did not stretch. It rested. After a moment, she spoke again. Road past the creek drifted last night. Daniel nodded. I saw. She did not follow with advice. He did not explain his route. The exchange ended exactly where it needed to. On the wall behind her, a map of the surrounding area hung slightly crooked. She straightened it without looking at it, as if the alignment had been memorized long ago. That was the second detail. When Lena finished closing tasks, she stepped outside to check the generator. Daniel watched through the window as she moved across the snow, careful but not hesitant, boots finding purchase without drama. She crouched, adjusted something near the base, waited a beat, then stood. No phone, no flashlight. She knew where things were. When she came back inside, she stamped snow from her boots, paused to remove them fully, then returned them to the rack. She did not leave wet prints across the floor. Storm might come early, she said, hanging her coat. Daniel glanced toward the sky. It is deciding. She smiled slightly at that. Not agreement. Recognition. He finished his coffee and set the mug in the sink without comment. She did not tell him where to put it. The sink was where it belonged. As he turned to leave, Lena reached beneath the counter and placed something on the wood between them. The gloves. Clean. Folded. Dry. You left these, she said. Not you gave me. Not thank you. Not a question. Daniel looked at them for a moment longer than he needed to. He did not reach for them immediately. They worked, she added gently. I returned them the same way. No implication. No weight added. He picked them up and nodded. Good. That was all. He stepped outside into the cold, the lodge door closing softly behind him. The light inside remained visible through the window, steady against the dark. Lena watched him go without tracking his movement. When he passed out of view, she turned back to the counter and resumed her work. The moment did not linger because she did not ask it to. Somewhere a listener might recognize that kind of presence. The kind that does not demand proof. The kind that notices what is needed and stops there. Daniel walked back toward the trail, gloves tucked into his coat. The wind had shifted. Snow moved sideways now, thin and sharp. He adjusted his path without stopping. Behind him, the lodge lights stayed on, warm and constant, doing their quiet work of holding space for whoever needed to step inside and leave again unchanged. That was how Lena Harper belonged in Alaska. Not by standing out, by fitting without friction, and in a place where silence could either isolate or protect. She had chosen the version that let people remain themselves. Daniel did not look back. He did not need to. The presence had already done its work. The next time they spoke, it happened without an opening. No era iver. No departure. Just overlap. Daniel Frost was at the lodge longer than usual, boots drying near the wall, snow melting into a shallow tray that had seen decades of winters. The storm outside had slowed the road to a single set of tracks, then none at all. Alaska had closed itself for the afternoon. Lena Harper moved quietly behind the counter, finishing what the weather had decided for her. The radio stayed off. The generator hummed once, then settled. Light filled the room without glare. Daniel sat at the small table near the window, hands around a mug that had gone from hot to warm without comment. He did not check the time. The storm had already made that irrelevant. Lena crossed the room to adjust the blinds, tilting them just enough to keep the snow from reflecting back inside. She did not look at him when she passed. You can stay, she said. One sentence. Not permission. Information. Daniel nodded. I know. That was the first exchange. They returned to silence without marking it. Minutes passed in small domestic sounds. With shifting, wind moving across the roof. A page turning in the ledger Lena kept by the register. Daniel stood and set his mug in the sink again, rinsed it once, left it upside down on the towel. Left side sticks, Lena said without turning. He adjusted the faucet half an inch. The drip stopped. Thanks, she said. He nodded. Sure. The second exchange ended there. Outside, snow pressed against the windows, thicker now, the world reduced to the lodge interior and whatever patience existed within it. The door did not open. No one else came. Lena finished her list and placed the pen parallel to the notebook's spine. She leaned back against the counter, arms folded loosely, weight shifted onto one foot. She was not watching Daniel, but she was aware of him in the way people become aware of a fire that does not need tending. You came through early, she said. Daniel considered the road. Snow was lighter then. She nodded once. That was the third exchange. He moved closer to the door, testing the handle with his palm. The storm answered by pushing harder. He released it. Trail might be closed by morning, Lena said. Daniel shrugged slightly. It opens when it opens. She smiled at that. Not because it was clever, because it was accurate. For a while, they stood on opposite sides of the room, each finishing nothing in particular. The lodge held them without instruction. Then Lena reached under the counter and set a bowl near the heater. Dry food, water refreshed. For your dogs, she said. Daniel paused. He had not asked. They wait better when they know, she added. He nodded, a fraction deeper this time. They do. He carried the bowl outside, returned with snow on his shoulders, brushed it off without ceremony. Lena handed him a towel. He used it once, folded it, set it back. You do. Not need to, she said. I know, he replied. That was the longest exchange so far. Still under 2 lines each. The warmth in the room shifted as the heater cycled off and on again. Light flickered once, then steadied. Lena checked the breaker panel out of habit, touched it without adjusting anything. When she turned back, Daniel was standing near the window, looking out without searching. Storms make people talk, she said. Sometimes, he answered. She did not follow that with a question. Instead, she picked up a chair that had been left slightly out of place and slid it back under the table. The scrape was brief, controlled. Daniel watched the motion, not the reason for it. Outside, the wind eased, just enough to be noticed. Snow fell straighter now, less sideways, as if reconsidering its approach. Road will clear, Lena said, more to the weather than to him. Eventually, Dana replied. That was enough agreement. When he finally moved toward the door again, Lena did not rush to say goodbye. She stood where she was, hands resting on the counter, posture open but not expectant. Drive slow, she said. I will, he answered. He stepped outside into the cold, the lodge light framing him for a second before the door closed. Lena listened as his boots moved away, then stopped listening before the sound disappeared completely. Silence returned, intact. Neither of them had learned anything new about the other. That was the point. The first contact had not been about discovery. It had been about confirming that nothing needed to be explained yet. And in Alaska, that was how warmth began. The next morning did not announce itself. No knock, no request, no reason given. Daniel Frost arrived at the lodge before the sign was flipped to open, boots quiet on packed snow, breath controlled, timing exact enough to suggest habit without explanation. The sky was pale, undecided, the kind of morning that felt borrowed rather than owned. Lena Harper was already inside. She stood near the back door, sleeves rolled once, then again, tying a string around a box of supplies that had arrived late the night before. Flour dust marked the edge of the counter. A crate waited by the wall, heavier than it looked. Daniel set his gloves down near the door and crossed the room without greeting. He lifted the crate, not dramatically, not quickly, just enough to move it. Lena turned at the sound, eyes flicking to the crate, then to him. You do not have to, she said. One sentence. Even. Final. Daniel shifted the weight, adjusted his grip. I know. He carried it to the storage room and set it down exactly where the floor had been cleared for it. No rearranging. No improvement. He stepped back out. Lena watched without stepping in. That shelf, she said, nodding toward the wall. is for today. Daniel looked once, then lifted the second crate instead. Smaller, lighter, apples wrapped in canvas. He placed it where she indicated and stepped away. That was the first boundary. She did not thank him. She did not ask why he was there. She finished tying the string and slid the box onto the counter, movement steady, unhurried. The radio stayed off. The lodge held its quiet. Daniel wiped his hands on his coat and moved toward the sink. He rinsed a measuring cup left from the night before and returned it to the rack without comment. "Leave that," Lena said, without turning. He stopped. "It dries faster there," she added, pointing to the towel by the window. Daniel adjusted the cup and stepped back. That was the second boundary. Outside, a truck passed and did not stop. Snow fell lightly, then paused as if listening. Lena lifted the crate lid and checked inventory. She spoke numbers under her breath, not for him, not for anyone else. Daniel stood near the door, present but not inserted. After a minute, she said, "If you're staying, take the stool." Not an invitation, a correction. He pulled the stool from beneath the counter and sat. Not leaning, not blocking. She continued working. The lodge door opened once. A local stepped in, nodded to both of them, picked up a newspaper, and left. No questions, no glances that lingered. Daniel stood when the door closed and reached for the broom, leaning against the wall. He swept the entryway once, then stopped. Lena looked up. "That part stays." She gestured to the corner where snow always gathered, no matter how often it was cleared. "It melts better there," she said. Daniel rested the broom back against the wall. He did not finish the sweep. The act ended where she placed it. Time moved differently after that. He stacked firewood by the stove until Lena held up a hand. One log too many. He returned it to the pile outside. He carried water from the pump, filling the kettle once, then set the bucket down without refilling it. When the kettle whistled, Lena poured. She did not offer him a cup. He did not ask. At mid-morning, the generator coughed once. Daniel moved toward the back door instinctively. Lena was already there. "I have it," she said. He stopped. She checked the panel, adjusted nothing, waited. The generator settled. She closed the panel and turned back. Daniel remained where he was. The lodge did not need saving. That was the point. Later, when a box of donated coats arrived, Daniel lifted it without comment and set it by the bench. Lena opened it, sorted quickly, then slid the box halfway back toward him. "These go to the clinic," she said. "Not here." He nodded and carried them back to the door. "Leave them," she added, quieter this time. He stopped again. "They pick up on Fridays," she said. "You can take them then if you want." "If you want. Not if you were here. Not because you should." Daniel set the box down where she indicated and stepped back, hands empty. The shift ended without a clock marking it. When Lena finally leaned against the counter, she looked at him for the first time directly. "You do not need to come in early," she said. Daniel met her gaze without holding it. "I was already up." That was not an explanation, just a fact. She nodded once, accepting it as such. "Tomorrow," she added, "I open alone." "I know," he replied. She watched him for a moment longer, then turned away. The storm that had threatened all morning never arrived. Snow stopped falling altogether, leaving the world paused between states. Daniel picked up his gloves and moved toward the door. "Do not clear the steps," Lena said. He paused, hand on the handle. "They freeze worse after," she continued. He released the handle and nodded. "Understood." That was the last exchange. He stepped outside into the cold, leaving no mark behind him beyond what had already been there. Inside, Lena stood still for a moment longer than necessary, then returned to her list. One item had been crossed out. Another remained. She did not feel helped. She did not feel interrupted. The shift had not changed her pace or her plans. It had only adjusted the room by inches, the way small, unannounced acts sometimes do. Somewhere, a listener might notice the difference. Not as generosity, not as obligation, but as a presence that offers capacity without asking to be needed. Daniel walked away from the lodge with the same steady pace he always kept, hands empty, shoulders light, the act already finished because it had never been meant to continue. The question from the road remained unanswered, but now another one had formed quietly beside it. What kind of man works where nothing is required of him? and leaves before anyone can depend on it. The change did not arrive as a decision. It showed up as timing. Daniel Frost reached a bend in the road at the usual hour, the one place where he normally slowed without thinking. The trees opened just enough there to give the road a wider breath. Snow gathered differently. Wind shifted. It had become a pause he trusted. This morning, he did not slow. The truck passed a bend at full, steady speed, tires holding, engine unbothered. He noticed it only after the moment had already moved behind him. The absence registered late, like a sound that should have been there and was not. By the time he realized what he had skipped, it was already too far back to correct without making a point of it. So he did not turn around. At the lodge, Lena Harper unlocked the door the same time she always did. The key met the lock cleanly. The door opened on the first pull. She stepped inside, set her bag down, and paused. Something was different. Not missing. Not wrong. Just shifted. The bench near the wall had been moved an inch closer to the heater. Not enough to matter. Enough to notice if you paid attention. She set it back where it had been before, aligning it with the floorboard seam she used as reference. The radio stayed off. She went through the opening routine without adjusting her pace. Lights on. Kettle filled. Sign turned. The world outside was quiet enough to hear snow settling from the roof. Daniel did not arrive early. He did not arrive at all. Hours passed without incident. A couple came in for coffee. A delivery truck stopped, unloaded, left. Lena stacked supplies, wrote notes in the ledger, crossed off what no longer needed remembering. At noon, she glanced once at the window, not searching, just acknowledging the light. The door remained closed. Across town, Daniel chose a different route through the trees. Longer by half a mile. Narrower. The trail required more attention, less habit. He moved through it deliberately, skis, tracking clean lines, breath measured. A tool he usually carried stayed behind in the truck. He noticed a missing weight on his shoulder 10 minutes in. He adjusted his balance without stopping. At the lodge, Lena reached for the broom to clear the entryway. The snow had drifted farther inside than usual, forming a thin line just past the threshold. She swept once, then stopped. The broom handle felt warmer than expected. She leaned it back against the wall instead of returning it to its hook. It stayed there, angled slightly wrong, waiting. No one commented. In the afternoon, the wind shifted direction. Snow began to fall sideways again, light but persistent. Daniel paused near a stand of trees and watched it for a moment longer than necessary. He checked his watch. The time matched his routine exactly. Still, he did not change course. Back at the lodge, Lena poured herself coffee and let it sit untouched on the counter. Steam rose and disappeared. When she finally took a sip, it had cooled enough to drink without thinking. She did not reheat it. There was no conversation amiss. No expectation left unmet. Only space behaving differently than it had the day before. Near closing, she stepped outside to check the steps. The snow had packed down unevenly, creating a shallow ridge where people usually hesitated. She considered clearing it, then stopped. The air was cold enough to refreeze whatever she disturbed. She left it alone. Daniel passed the road leading to the lodge without looking. He did not accelerate. He did not slow. The distance between the truck and the building remained constant, unacknowledged. The dogs followed his pace, unbothered. When he reached the cabin, the light inside came on later than usual. The lamp hesitated before settling. He replaced the bulb with another from the drawer, identical and used. The old one remained on the table longer than necessary before he set it aside. He did not turn the radio on. The husky lay near the door instead of the hearth, head resting on paws, eyes open. Daniel noticed, then sat at the table without redirecting the dog. Outside, the storm did not arrive fully. It stayed in a state of almost, snow falling just enough to soften edges without erasing them. At the lodge, Lena finished closing alone. She locked the door, turned the sign, and stood for a moment with her hand still on the wood. The broom remained where she had left it. She picked it up, returned it to the hook, adjusted it so the handle rested straight. The correction felt smaller than it should have. When she stepped outside, the steps were uneven, just as she had left them. She took them carefully, testing each one before shifting her weight. Somewhere, someone listening might recognize this kind of tension. Not the sharp kind. The quiet kind that asks the body to slow down without asking the mind to decide anything yet. Daniel sat in the cabin with his hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. He drank it anyway. The taste was unchanged. He did not think about the bend in the road. Lena walked to her car with her collar turned up, breath steady, steps measured. She did not look back at the building once she reached the driver's seat. No words had been exchanged. No plans altered out loud. Only timing slightly off. Distance slightly widened. A door that closed a second earlier than usual. A tool left where it was not meant to stay. In places like this, those were the signs that mattered. And for anyone watching quietly, it was enough to slow their own breathing without realizing why, noticing the space between moments, and letting it remain exactly as it was. The next day began with a correction. Daniel Frost arrived later than he usually did. Not enough to be late, just enough to register. The road had been cleared overnight, but the edges remained soft, uncertain. He parked farther from the lodge than before, choosing a spot that required more walking and less visibility. Inside, Lena Harper was already working. She looked up when the door closed, then back down again. No pause. No question. You missed yesterday, she said. One line. Neutral. Practical. Daniel nodded. I took a longer trail. That was all. She accepted it without weighing it. She slid a clipboard across the counter, stopping it before it reached him. Deliveries come Fridays, she said. If you are here, they can use help. If not, they manage. If you are here. If not. He nodded again. Understood. The boundary was clear. It did not ask for consistency. It defined conditions. Daniel moved toward the storage room, stopped, then stepped back. Tell me where, he said. She pointed once. He followed the direction exactly, not improving, not anticipating. The work unfolded slowly after that. Boxes moved from one place to another. A shelf cleared, then left alone. Snow tracked in and dried without complaint. The lodge held a steady rhythm that did not bend to accommodate him. At mid-morning, Daniel reached for the kettle out of habit. Lena spoke without turning. I handle that. He withdrew his hand. Okay. The exchange did not linger. Later, when the generator flickered, he did not move. Lena adjusted the panel, waited, closed it. The lights steadied. You can sit, she said, nodding toward the stool. He sat. From there, the distance between them settled into something usable. Not close. Not far. Defined by function. A man came in asking for directions. Lena answered. Daniel remained still. Another asked about trail conditions. Lena handed him a map and pointed to the margins she had marked weeks ago. Daniel did not add anything. When the room cleared again, Lena placed a folded piece of paper on the counter. Clinic needs blankets, she said. They do not want new ones. Used clean. No laves. Daniel looked at the paper. I can bring some. She met his eyes briefly. Only if you already have them. Ido. Then fine. Not a request. Not a favor. A transaction with limits. He did not say when. In the afternoon, the snow began again, light and patient. Daniel stepped outside to check the dogs, then returned without comment. Lena watched the door close behind him, then returned her list. At closing, she moved the bench near the heater again, this time leaving it where it landed. Daniel noticed. He did not adjust it. That night, he brought 2 blankets to the clinic and left them with a nurse on duty. No note. No name. He did not wait. The next morning, he did not come early. When he arrived, Lena was alone at the counter, reading. She looked up once. They arrived, she said. He nodded. Good. She turned a page. That was the acknowledgement. Later, she set a mug on the counter near him. Not handed. Placed. You can have this, she said. I made too much. He took it. Thank you. The words landed without weight. They worked alongside each other without crossing lines. When Daniel lifted something heavy, Lena watched to ensure it was not needed elsewhere. When she moved past him in narrow space, he stepped back without comment. At one point, he reached for a tool and found it missing. He paused, then set his hands down. It is in the back, Lena said. I moved it. He nodded. All right, she added, after a moment. I will put it back after. No rush, he replied. That was the shift. Not closeness. Not distance erased. A small trust built from respecting where one thing ended and another began. When he left that afternoon, he did not look back. Lena watched him go, then returned to the counter and crossed off one item. The lodge felt unchanged. That was how she knew the boundary had held. And Daniel, walking back to the truck, carried nothing with him that he had not arrived with, except the knowledge of where he did not need to step. In Alaska, that was how things moved forward, by staying within what was offered. Movement returned without raising its voice. Not enough to break the rhythm, just enough to remind the land that people were still moving through it. The morning followed the same outline Daniel Frost had learned to trust. Coffee ground by hand. Water heated until it breathed, but did not rush. Dogs harnessed in silence. The sled carried less than usual, lighter by choice rather than need. What changed was the order. He left the cabin before the light reached the trees, earlier than the days before, later than the days he remembered from another life. The road accepted him without comment. Snow held its shape longer now, crusted on top, softer underneath. It made walking sound different. In town, the lodge door opened on time. Lena Harper stepped inside and paused, listening to the building settle. The heater kicked on once, then held. She set the bench where she had left it the night before, did not adjust it further, and turned the sign to open. The first hour passed cleanly. Daniel arrived after that. Not early, not late, timing adjusted just enough to match the space that had formed between them. He did not take the stool. He did not stand in the doorway. He set a small bundle near the wall where donations usually waited. Blankets. Folded. Used. Clean. She saw them, nodded once, and moved them without comment. Routine resumed, but the repetition no longer matched exactly. One detail had shifted. Outside, the snow softened again by midday. The temperature rose just enough to make the top layer unstable. The trail behind the lodge looked familiar, but felt different underfoot. Lena noticed when a local hesitated at the door, boots half on, half off. "Trail is slick past the creek," she said. The man nodded and waited for nothing more. Later, when the door closed again, she reached for the shovel out of habit, then stopped. The steps were uneven, but not dangerous yet. Clearing them now would only make them freeze harder by night. She leaned the shovel against the wall and left it there. Daniel noticed when he stepped outside. He did not move it. That was the pattern now. Things left where they were on purpose. In the afternoon, movement found them. Not dramatic. Not loud. A dog barked once from farther down the road. Short. Sharp. Then quiet. Lena looked up. Daniel was already moving, coat on, boots half-laced. He stopped at the door and waited. "Near the bend," she said. "Do not rush." He nodded and stepped out. The sound reached them before the sight. Metal scraping ice. A car angled wrong, front end too close to the shoulder, rear wheels spinning without traction. Daniel approached slowly, hands visible, movement small. A woman sat behind the wheel, foot pressing the brake too hard, eyes fixed ahead. "Do not spin it," Lena said from behind him. She had followed to the edge of the steps, no closer. The woman nodded, breath shallow, hands still gripping the wheel. Daniel crouched, checked the distance between tire and drop. It was close, but not urgent yet. The snow beneath had not given way. Not fully. He placed a wedge of packed snow behind the rear tire, then stepped back. "Neutral," he said. The woman complied. Daniel tested the ground with his boot, then gestured for her to ease off. The car shifted an inch, then stopped. That was enough. He did not push further. He did not pull. Lena watched the slope, the snow, the angle of the car. "Leave it," she said. "Tow truck comes after 3. Daniel straightened. The woman opened the door slightly, as if to speak, then closed it again. She nodded instead. Daniel stepped back. The distance between him and the car increased deliberately. No rescue completed. No debt created. The near rescue ended where it was safe to end. They returned to the lodge without exchanging words. Inside, the heater cycled on and off. The shovel remained where it leaned. The bench stayed slightly off-center. Routine resumed, but the body remembered the interruption. Later, Daniel reached for his mug and found it already filled. Lena did not look up. It was cold. He nodded and drank it without comment. At closing, the tow truck passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the lodge windows. The sound faded. The road returned to stillness. That night, the past arrived quietly. Daniel found an envelope tucked between two books he had not opened in months. No label, just his name, written in a hand that knew how to keep letters even. He did not open it. He set it back where it had been and returned the book to its place. The fire burned low. The dog slept near the door again instead of the hearth. At the lodge, Lena finished her list and paused at the last line. Something had been added in a different ink. She did not remember writing it. She crossed it out anyway. The next morning, the routine repeated. Coffee, light, snow. But when Daniel passed the bend, he slowed this time, only for a second, long enough to see that the tracks from the day before had filled in overnight, erased without effort. The road looked new again, as if nothing had almost happened there. He continued on without adjusting his speed. Behind him, the land closed the space he had moved through. At the lodge, Lena moved the shovel back to its hook before opening the door. She aligned it carefully, handle straight, blade resting flat. The bench stayed where it was. Small disruptions had come and gone. Nothing had been claimed. Nothing owed. The routines remained, altered just enough to hold memory without being shaped by it. In Alaska, that was how motion survived the quiet. By touching the surface and leaving no mark. The cost showed up quietly, not as a mistake, not as regret, as subtraction. Daniel Frost reached the cabin later than planned that night, the sky already dark enough to hide the tree line. The dogs slowed on the last stretch, not tired, just aware that the day had stretched longer than intended. He unhitched them, checked paws, ran a hand once along a flank, then brought the sled inside. The stove was cold, not failed, just unattended. He added kindling, then one log, then another. The fire caught, but it took longer than usual to settle. He stood near it without removing his coat, waiting for the heat to arrive instead of forcing it. The kettle remained empty. He noticed the absence and filled it, then set it on the stove and left it there longer than he should have. When it finally whistled, the sound fell sharper than normal. That was the first cost. Heat delayed. Time extended. In the morning, the light came later. Clouds held it back. Daniel woke at the same hour, but the room felt colder, the air heavier. He adjusted his layers before moving, adding what he usually left behind. Outside, the snow had crusted overnight. The top layer held, then broke. Each step required more attention. The dogs moved carefully, their pace reduced without command. The route into town took longer. At the lodge, Lena Harper noticed the difference before she saw him. The door opened later than it had the day before. Not late, just later. The sound carried differently through the room. You missed the first delivery, she said. One sentence. Factual. Daniel nodded. I will catch the next. She slid the clipboard toward him, then stopped it halfway. Only if it fits. If it does not, he said, leave it. She met his eyes briefly. Good. The boundary held. They worked in parallel, the space between them slightly narrower than before, not by intention, by necessity. Supplies had arrived unevenly. A box meant for the clinic sat where it should not. A crate of dry goods waited without a place. Daniel lifted one, then paused. That stays, Lena said. He set it down. Later, he carried water from the pump, filling the bucket to the line she had marked weeks ago. He did not overfill it. He did not top it off. The kettle went on. The heater cycled. The room warmed slowly. By midday, the second cost arrived. The road beyond the lodge closed earlier than expected. Not officially, just enough drift to discourage travel without stopping it completely. A man came in asking for fuel, then left without it. Lena watched the window longer than usual. If you go now, she said, you'll be late back. Daniel considered the distance, the light, the temperature. I know. She did not tell him to stay. She did not tell him to leave. He went. The errand took longer than planned. The snow softened again, then refroze. Tires held, then slipped. He adjusted speed, route, expectations. When he returned, the lodge lights were already dimmed. Lena was closing. You did not have to, she said, glancing at the supplies he carried in. He set them down. They were on the way. They rarely are, she replied. The exchange ended there. She checked the list, crossed off one item, left another untouched. The day did not resolve itself cleanly. It rarely did. Outside, the temperature dropped faster than forecast. Daniel stepped back into the cold and felt it immediately, sharper than the morning, more insistent. He adjusted his collar, then stopped. "You will burn more wood tonight," Lena said from the doorway. He turned. "I will." She hesitated, then added, "The shed near the bend has dry logs. Use those." That was new, not an offer. Information that carried trust. He nodded. "Thank you." She closed the door before the words could settle into anything else. The cost followed him home. The detour to the shed added miles. The logs were dry, but heavier than expected. He loaded only what he could carry without strain. 2 trips instead of 1. Breath visible. Hands numb before warming returned. By the time the fire was steady again, the night had fully claimed the cabin. He ate later than usual. Simple food, less of it. He left the plate unwashed for a moment longer than normal, then corrected it. The dog lay near the hearth again, closer this time. In the morning, Daniel woke with the sense of something unfinished. Not wrong, just incomplete. At the lodge, Lena noticed he arrived empty-handed. "No blankets today," she said. "They are drying," he replied. "Then tomorrow," she said. Not disappointment. Scheduling. They stood closer at the counter than before. The space narrowed by the work that remained undone. When she passed him, her sleeve brushed his coat. The contact lasted less than a second. Neither adjusted. The cost had not been dramatic. No loss. No damage. Only time spent elsewhere. Heat delayed. An errand missed, then recovered at the edge. But it had shifted the shape of the days. Actions now carried weight. Not because they were large, but because they arrived slightly late or slightly early, asking both of them to adapt without discussion. And that adaptation, small and practical, moved the relationship one step forward. Not toward resolution, toward awareness. In Alaska, that was enough to change how tomorrow would need to be handled. The realization did not arrive as a thought. It arrived as a turn he did not avoid. Daniel Frost reached the familiar split in the road just after sunrise, the place where the packed snow narrowed and the trees leaned closer, the place he had been passing without slowing for days. The light was thin, stretched low across the surface, catching the ice in small, sharp points. He eased off the accelerator. Not all the way, just enough. The truck rolled through the bend at a different speed than it had yesterday. Tires held. The engine stayed quiet. Nothing protested the decision. He continued on the same road. That was the change. At the cabin later that morning, he moved through the routine without correcting it back to its earlier shape. Coffee still ground by hand. Water heated until ready. The dogs waited calm, watching his hands rather than the door. When he loaded supplies, he packed less than usual. 1 crate stayed behind. He closed the tailgate and did not reopen it to reconsider. In town, the lodge door was already open. Lena Harper stood at the counter, sleeves rolled once, not twice today, checking the ledger before setting it aside. She looked up when Daniel entered, then returned to the page she had been reading. "You are early," she said. Not approval. Observation. Daniel nodded. Road was clear. She accepted that without response. He set a small box near the wall where the clinic items usually waited. Not blankets. Something else. Soap. Unscented. Practical. Lena glanced at it, then at him. "They will take that." He nodded again. "Good." No explanation followed. They worked alongside each other without adjusting their pace. To match. When she moved his stool, he stepped around it. When he reached for the broom, he checked her position first and left it alone. At mid-morning, the door opened and closed twice in quick succession. A man came in, left, then returned asking about fuel again. Lena answered. Daniel did not add anything. Later, she noticed something else. The shovel by the door was still on its hook. The steps outside had not been touched. "You did not clear them," she said. Daniel looked toward the door. "They will freeze." She nodded. "They will." The agreement ended there. The day carried on without interruption. The generator held. The heater cycled evenly. The kettle emptied and was refilled once, not twice. When Daniel moved to leave, he paused at the door. "Tomorrow," he said, Deliveries come earlier. Lena looked up. They do. I can take the first run, he added. She considered the distance, the timing, the way the roads had been behaving lately. Only if the weather holds, she said. If it does not, he replied, I will turn back. That was the understanding. She nodded once. Then we will see. He stepped outside without waiting for more. That night at the cabin, Daniel chose the chair that faced the window instead of the table. He ate there, plate balanced carefully, eyes occasionally lifting to the dark beyond the glass. The fire burned lower than usual. He did not add another log. The dog lay near the hearth, head down, tail still. The envelope between the books remained unopened. In the morning, the sky was clear enough to be misleading. Daniel loaded the truck and started the engine earlier than necessary. He reached the bend and slowed again, this time without noticing the decision after it was made. The road held. At the lodge, Lena was already outside, checking the steps before opening. She straightened when she heard the truck approach, then stepped back without moving out of the way. You made it, she said. He nodded. So far. He unloaded the first delivery and set it where she pointed. When the second box proved heavier than expected, he paused, then set it back in the truck. Later, he said. She looked at the sky. Later. The trust was small, contained, and specific. They worked through the morning without changing the shape of the space between them. When Daniel left for the next run, he took the longer route without being asked. Lena watched the road until the truck disappeared, then turned back to the counter and continued her work. Somewhere, someone listening might recognize this moment. Not as a declaration, not as a promise, but as a quiet widening of what had been possible the day before. A man choosing not to avoid the same bend again. A woman allowing the choice without stepping into it. Nothing had been named, nothing revealed, only one decision made differently, and another respected enough to be left alone. In Alaska, that was how change stayed real. The routine returned the way it always did, quietly, without announcement. Daniel Frost woke before the light reached the trees, the same hour he had kept for weeks. The cabin held its temperature overnight better than it had before. He noticed, not because it was warmer, but because he did not need to add a log right away. He ground the coffee after heating the water this time, reversing the order without thinking. The sound filled the kitchen differently. He poured slower, let it settle. The mug warmed his hands sooner than expected. Outside, the dogs waited, already harnessed from a night before. He checked them anyway. One strap, two, the third. He paused, then tightened the second again. Not because it was loose, because the order had changed. The trail behind the cabin looked the same. Snow smooth, trees still, wind patient. Daniel stepped into it without measuring the distance. He reached the bend and slowed, not to check the road, but to check himself against it. The pause lasted a breath longer than yesterday, then ended on its own. In town, the lodge door was open when he arrived. Lena Harper was not behind the counter. She was near the window, adjusting the blinds to cut the glare off the snow. She finished, then turned. Morning, she said. Morning, he replied. The exchange settled without wait. He set the supplies down where they usually went, then moved them once, aligning them with the edge of the shelf instead of the wall. Lena noticed and did not correct it. She poured coffee before he reached for a mug, set it down near the corner of the counter instead of the center. Still hot, she said. He nodded. Good. They worked through the morning, without rushing to finish anything early. The ledger stayed open longer. The kettle boiled once, then rested. The heater cycled and held. At mid-morning, Daniel reached for the broom, then stopped and moved the bench instead. Snow gathered differently after that. The change was small enough to miss if you were not watching. Lena watched. She adjusted nothing. When a delivery arrived earlier than expected, Daniel took the first box and left the second in the truck. Lena nodded once, already moving to make space. Next run, she asked. If the road holds, he said. If it does not, she replied, it waits. That was the agreement now. Later, when the lodge emptied, Lena stepped outside to check the steps. Daniel followed, not ahead of her, not behind. The snow had packed unevenly again. She tested it with her boot, then stepped back. Leave it, she said. He nodded. It will freeze. It will, she agreed. They went back inside without fixing it. That afternoon, the routine repeated with slight variations. He carried less. She spoke less. The distance between them remained the same, but the air around it felt more usable. At closing, Daniel left before the lights dimmed. Lena locked the door and stood with her hand on the handle for a moment, then released it. The bench stayed where it had been left. The shovel stayed on its hook. At the cabin, Daniel ate later than usual but slept earlier. He set the mug in the sink and did not wash it immediately. The dog lay near the door again, not guarding, just present. The envelope between the books remained untouched. In the morning, the same steps repeated. Coffee, harness, road. But the order shifted again. He loaded the truck after starting the engine. He checked the sky last instead of first. At the lodge, Lena opened alone. When Daniel arrived, she was already sweeping. He waited until she finished before stepping inside. "You're back on schedule," she said. He considered the phrase, then nodded. "Mostly." She smiled at that. Brief. Gone. The routine had returned. Same motions. Same places. But the meaning had changed without being named. Alaska remained what it was. Cold. Open. Unmoved. The people moving through it had learned how to stand inside the same steps differently, allowing the order to shift just enough to carry what had been added without asking for more. Nothing had ended. Nothing had begun. The routine simply continued, changed by use, steady enough to hold what came next. Zui dai la per de mui ba da được chỉnh lại, loại bỏ hoàn toàn mình để ý. Giữ đúng đến Alaska, open loop aim, sẽ ta chìm giảm permission nhưng không điều kiện, không kéo người nghe ra khỏi cảnh. Underscore part 13, open loop ending, revised in if the night settled the way it always did. Slowly, without asking permission, Daniel Frost remained outside the cabin a moment longer than before, watching the last edge of light thin out across the snow. The ground and the sky reached the same color, indistinguishable, steady. The dogs had already folded into themselves, breath even, bodies angled toward the door as though the day had finished its work and left quietly. He went inside and closed the door with care. The latch caught clean on the first try. The fire held without help. He set his coat on the hook nearest the door, not the one he usually used, and left it there. The shift did not announce itself. It did not need to. In town, the lodge lights dimmed in stages. Lena Harper moved through the final checks without looking at the clock. The bench stayed where it had been all afternoon. The shovel remained on its hook. The ledger was closed, then opened once more, then closed again as though the building needed one extra breath before sleeping. Outside, the road lay empty. No engines passed. No tracks crossed it. Snow fell lightly, straight down. Daniel filled the kettle, set it on the stove, then lifted it off again before the heat took hold. He sat instead, chair angled toward the window, hands resting where they landed. The envelope between the books remained untouched. Lena locked the lodge door and tested it once. She released the handle and stepped back. The steps remained uneven. She left them that way. She walked to her car without hurry, then paused before opening the door, listening to the town settle behind her. The quiet did not press. It simply stayed. Morning returned with the same cold and the same light. The routine resumed. Coffee, harness, road. Daniel slowed at the bend again, not to look ahead, but because the pause belonged there now. The decision no longer needed attention. At the lodge, Lena opened the door and let the day in. The first mug was poured and left waiting. When Daniel arrived, she did not look up right away. When she did, she nodded once. Morning, she said. Morning, he replied. Nothing followed. They worked as they had learned to do. Not closer, not farther, aligned enough to move without friction. The day unfolded without interruption. Supplies found their places. The heater held. The light shifted. By late afternoon, Daniel finished his last task and moved toward the door. The road looks clear, he said. Lena glanced outside. For now, he nodded. I will be back. She did not ask when. He left. The lodge remained warm. The cabin did too. Alaska continued as it always had, wide and indifferent, generous with space. Somewhere between the cabin and the lodge, a new order had formed. Not declared, not built, practiced until held. It was a way of living that did not require explanation. A way of helping that did not ask to be remembered. A way of standing near another person without stepping into what belonged to them. In places like this, dignity lived in restraint. Safety lived in rhythm. Trust lived in repetition, in stopping when enough had been done. The road remained. The bend waited. The light returned. The quiet stayed available. The story rested there, unclosed, steady enough to be returned to whenever the night allowed it.